My name is Vanessa. I'm 30 years old, a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. I stood at the forefront of the formation, my heart pounding like a war drum as I caught my father's gaze from the sidelines. At 30 years old and a first lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps, I had learned to mask my emotions with a stoic exterior, but nothing could suppress the tightness in my chest as I watched him fumble with his cap, the familiar sign of his anxiety. I expected better, he had said to me only days before the ceremony, his disappointment weighing heavily in the air between us. The words replayed in my mind, mingling with the sight of 200 Marines in crisp uniforms standing tall and proud before me, their faces set with purpose. It was a moment that should have filled me with pride, yet all I felt was the sting of expectation that I felt I could never meet. As the commanding officer called for the salute, I noticed my hands trembling, barely able to hold the salute steady. The weight of my father's expectations seemed to cascade down like a heavy cloak, tethering me to his disapproval. The moment the phrase, "first to fight," echoed through the air, a chorus of voices washed over me, yet I felt disconnected, as if I were watching my life unfold from a distance. I had spent years training, sacrificing everything to earn my place alongside these brave men and women, and yet standing there, I felt as if my accomplishments were overshadowed by the shadow of my father's words. Did my father see me as a warrior, or merely as a child who had failed to impress? The pride that should have existed in that moment was suffocated under the weight of his discontent. I couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy that gnawed at me with every beat of my heart, and I struggled to find my voice among the clamor of the saluting Marines. I remembered the countless nights spent trudging through mud and sweat, the aching muscles, and the camaraderie that had become my lifeline. But in this instant, those memories felt distant, overshadowed by the singular thought pressing against my mind: why did I care so much about his opinion? Why couldn't I just embrace the unity of our mission rather than the judgment of one man? As the last note of the anthem faded into the background, I forced myself to breathe deeply, focusing on the rhythm of my breath, a surge and retreat, like the ocean waves of my childhood, a comforting reminder of simpler times. I glanced over at my Marines, their eyes steady, knowing they saw me as their leader, someone who would fight beside them without hesitation. Yet, a spark of doubt flickered within me, one I fought to extinguish. How could I lead them when I felt so uncertain of my own worth? Would they see past my uniform to the fragile woman inside, the one still desperate for her father's approval? The ceremony ended with cheers and camaraderie, yet I felt like an island surrounded by the ocean of my own thoughts, an echo of my father's voice hanging in the air. In that moment, I resolved to prove myself, not just to him, but to myself. I wasn't just a lieutenant, I was a Marine, with the spirit to fight for those I lead and the courage to face my fears, even when they came dressed as my father's expectations. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I understood that embracing my own truth would be the first battlefield I needed to conquer. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The air was thick with anticipation as I stood in the rear of the auditorium, my heart pounding against my chest like a drumbeat I couldn't silence. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the faces of the Marines seated in neat rows, their uniforms sharp and pressed, an outward representation of their dedication and discipline. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic thoughts racing through my mind. I had seen camaraderie in action, and yet, as I prepared to address them, I felt an unfamiliar swell of doubt creeping in from the edges. What could I possibly convey that would resonate with these men and women who had given so much to their country? As I stepped onto the stage, the murmurs faded into an expectant hush. 200 pairs of eyes focused on me, each gaze expecting strength, clarity, and, above all, a sense of unwavering leadership. I had trained for this moment, each early morning run, every grueling exercise, the emotional toll of making life and death decisions. Still, standing there under the spotlight, I felt a flicker of vulnerability. I remembered what my father had said when I first announced my decision to enlist. I expected better, he had remarked, his disappointment palpable. That moment sat heavy in my chest, a reminder that not everyone understood the sacrifices we made for a cause greater than ourselves. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak. My voice steadied with the rhythm of my thoughts, and I felt the presence of the Marines bolster my resolve. As your first lieutenant, I'm not only here to lead but to serve, to ensure that each one of you knows the impact you have in this world. I saw nods of understanding ripple through the crowd. These were not just soldiers, they were individuals with hopes, dreams, and families who waited for their safe return. I realized my role wasn't solely about commanding them, it was about empowering them, instilling trust in their abilities and a sense of mission that transcended our orders. The respect I felt for my fellow Marines grew exponentially as I spoke. They had faced challenges I could only begin to imagine, battling through physical and emotional hurdles that might never show on their resilient faces. I remembered my first deployment, nights spent lying awake, wrestling with fears that gnawed at me from within. Would I be enough? Could I protect my team? Yet here I was, donning the uniform with pride, standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had trained for moments just like this. When we say first to fight, it encapsulates our commitment, our strength, and our unwavering resolve as a team, I continued, watching their expressions grow more determined, as if they were drawing strength from one another. When the speech came to a close, I felt the swell of energy in the room, a collective pulse that resonated from the front to the back. It felt good to remind them of our bonds, of the sacrifices we've made and those that still lay ahead. It was a reminder that every challenge faced together only tightened our resolve. I gave a firm nod, my own spirit ignited by their response, and watched as the first row of Marines stood in unison, their professionalism and pride radiating. First TO fight, they cried out, their voices echoing like thunder, and I felt a sense of unity swell in my chest. In that moment, the weight of my father's words faded. What mattered was the bond that connected us all, a bond that would guide us through the darkest of days ahead. The sharp report of boots hitting the concrete snapped me back to the present, but the sound echoed through my mind like a distant thunder. I was standing at attention, flanked by 2 Marines, my body rigid with a mix of pride and anxiety. It was the day of the ceremony, a line of impeccably uniformed men and women, all ready to honor our fallen. But as I gazed out over the assembled crowd, something triggered a memory buried deep within me, and the world around me faded momentarily, leaving just the resounding pulse of my heart. I was 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the carpet in my childhood home, eyes glued to the television. My father had come home from a long deployment, a sweep of relief washing over us like a wave. But for every joyous reunion, there were the haunting images, news reports of troops battling overseas, of lives forever changed. I remember the way his shoulders seemed heavier after those deployments, how he held my mother's hands a little tighter. I had asked him once, "Dad, is it scary?" He had knelt down to meet my gaze, his blue eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Sweetheart," he said, "there's a lot out there I can't control, but I always expect better." Those words stuck, the weight of expectation like a constant companion. It was that same expectation that had propelled me into this uniform. I wanted to honor him, to stand where he stood and make him proud. Yet, as I stood there, my heart raced at the thought of the countless lives intertwined with our mission. Each Marine lined up before me had their own journey, their own sacrifices. I could almost hear my father's voice echoing in my mind, urging me to rise above the challenges, to exceed his expectations. But what if I fell short? What if the weight of my duty became too heavy? These thoughts clawed at me, gnawing away at the perimeter I had built around my emotions. Then the moment hit me, freezing time. I glanced down the line, taking in the chiseled faces and the determination that glimmered in their eyes. Each of these Marines had stories, sleepless nights spent strategizing, moments of doubt, glimpses of fear. And yet, here we stood, a profound sense of unity binding us together like an unspoken pact. I felt a lump form in my throat, the memories of past sacrifices creeping in, of friends who had never made it back, of those who still bore the scars of combat. The ceremony was about them, their struggles and triumphs, and my heart ached for the weight they carried. In that brief silence before the ceremony began, I took a deep breath, channeling those memories into strength rather than fear. I reminded myself of my mission, the promise I had made to protect and serve. I would not let the shadows of doubt engulf me. As I opened my mouth to speak, the words flowed with an urgency I had not anticipated. "We are the first to fight," I declared, my voice steady and resolute. The echoes of my father's advice filled me with purpose. I would not disappoint. Together we stood, a resilient force, ready to face whatever awaited us. I remember the first time I heard my dad's voice crack during a family dinner. It was just before my brother's graduation, and the air was thick with the scent of roast beef and the sound of clinking silverware. I sat there, a high school junior at the time, watching him struggle to find the words while my mom's laughter faded into an uneasy silence. He slammed his fist down on the table, sending a fork flying. "I expected better from you too," he yelled, his eyes wild and desperate. It was the first time I understood the weight of expectations, and how those expectations could crush you if you weren't careful. I often wondered what it was about our family that made him so angry. We weren't perfect, but we were navigating our way through life like everyone else. Sure, my brother had his head stuck in video games, and I was caught up in my own world of dance classes and teen drama. Yet, Dad seemed to see our mediocrity as a personal betrayal. I remember overhearing him on the phone with his brother, a former Marine himself, lamenting about how he had sacrificed so much for us, only to see us throw it away with our slacker habits. I used to think about how unfair it was that my father couldn't see beyond the surface, that his vision was narrowed by his own rigid ideals. The day I decided to enlist, I felt like I was breaking free from that suffocating atmosphere. At 18, standing in that recruiting office, I felt a surge of purpose. I wanted to prove to him, and maybe to myself, that I could embrace the grit and discipline he always preached about. When I finally told my parents, Dad's reaction was a mix of pride and disbelief. "Marines," he said, eyes wide. "I always thought you'd do something softer." It was his way of saying he cared, that he had never expected me to choose a path that echoed his own experiences. But those words haunted me. They made me feel like a disappointment despite the honor I felt in that decision. As I rose through the ranks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was striving for something more than just military accolades. Each promotion brought me closer to the person I wanted to be, yet the shadow of my father's expectations loomed large. I often thought about those moments at the dinner table, the anger and disappointment etched in his voice. I wanted to return to him as a success in his eyes, yet I also wanted to carve my own identity, blending my values with the ones he instilled in me. It was a dangerous duality, and one that came to a head the day I returned home in my dress blues, freshly promoted to first lieutenant. The moment I stepped through that front door, my heart raced. I had come back not just as his daughter but as a woman shaped by my choices and experiences. My dad stood up, and for a split second, I thought I saw the glimmer of pride in his eyes. Then, without a word, he saluted me. A line of unspoken conversation passed between us in that exchange, one filled with years of conflict and understanding. My heart swelled as I remembered the Marines I stood with, their voices echoing First TO fight in my mind. In that moment, I realized that while our paths had twisted and turned, the journey had been ours alone to travel, and his salute meant he was finally ready to accept that, even if it took him years to get there. As I stood in front of the battalion, their faces a blend of anticipation and skepticism, I felt the weight of every expectation that had ever been placed upon me. My father's voice echoed in my mind, the lingering disappointment in his tone when I told him I wanted this life. I brushed off the memories, inhaling deeply to steady my nerves. All eyes were on me, and in that moment, it felt as though the very air crackled with unspoken judgments, each Marine likely wondering how a woman like me could lead them. I could almost hear their thoughts. Can she really handle us? The first time I pulled rank, I was terrified. A scheduling mix-up had left my unit without a trained sniper because of a lack of communication. I had to redirect the training day, confidently telling my sergeant to adjust the itinerary. I could see his eyebrows furrow in disbelief, but I held my ground. It had been my responsibility to ensure these men could defend our positions, and I wasn't going to let my lack of experience undermine the mission. I still remember the way they looked at me. Half of them were ready to respect my authority, while the other half seemed poised for failure. The self-doubt twisted in my stomach, a constant reminder that I had to prove I belonged here. Each day felt like an uphill battle, filled with the subtle nuances of command I had yet to master. I remember working late into the night, poring over manuals, and practicing drills in front of the mirror until my jaw ached from repeating commands. Yet, when I finally stood in the morning light, ready to face the day, I could feel my resolve solidifying with each passing minute. I called for formations, shouted commands, trying to project my voice to drown out my inner critic. I wanted to believe that I could, that I was worthy of the ranks. However, I craved validation from a place deeper than the surface accolades, something that would cement my sense of belonging in this sea of olive drab. Then came the day of the first physical training test. I can still picture the gravel underfoot as we gathered in the early dawn, the chill in the air sharper than the usual military banter. As I led the stretches, my heart raced, anxious about my performance. I was determined to set an example. When the running began, the miles stretched on like an eternity. Every step felt like a declaration, each breath a reminder that I was here to stay. Though some Marines zoomed past me, I kept my pace steady, driven by a mix of fear and fierce determination. I envisioned my father's disappointed face and pushed harder, needing to prove that I was more than just the daughter of a former soldier. By the time I crossed the finish line, my legs burned, my lungs screamed for relief, but there was something electrifying in that moment. The pride blooming in my chest felt foreign yet exhilarating. I was met with a chorus of whoops and claps, their disbelief twisting into respect. And then, as if choreographed, the battalion stood in unison, saluting me, shouting first to fight. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. It was as if those moments of fear and anxiety had burst into a new understanding. I wasn't just fighting against their doubts, I was fighting for my own worth. That day sprung open the door for me. I remember standing there, my heart pounding, as the weight of expectation loomed over me like a thick fog. It was my first official address as a first lieutenant, a position I had dreamed of since I was a little girl playing dress-up with my brother's camo gear. I had hoped that the uniform would mean I could inspire, that I could lead with strength, but now, looking out at a sea of faces, hardened by countless deployments yet filled with curiosity, I felt vulnerable. In that moment, I couldn't shake the nagging voice in the back of my mind. I expected better. The words belonged to my father, a veteran himself, and his disappointment echoed even louder than the cheers I had received when I first joined. Standing at the podium, the room was a cacophony of mixed emotions, some of my fellow Marines unsure about the new leadership that came in the shape of a woman. Yes, I had trained hard, earned my stripes, and successfully led my unit through tough times, yet I sensed the skepticism in their eyes. My stomach churned as I cleared my throat, trying to summon the confidence I had cultivated over years of rigorous training. Would they hear me? Would they believe in me? These thoughts spiraled like a whirlwind, threatening to drown out my true purpose. But then I remembered what my father had taught me about overcoming obstacles, that expectations, no matter how heavy, could be transformed into motivation. As I began to speak, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline mixed with urgency. I shared my journey, the long nights of studying tactics, the grueling physical trials, and the pain of self-doubt that had once gripped me tightly. I didn't gloss over the struggles, instead, I bared my soul. I spoke of unity, of looking beyond rank and gender, and of the bond that would only be strengthened by understanding and respect. I had learned that overcoming adversity wasn't just about individual triumphs, but also about lifting one another up and achieving greatness together. Slowly, I saw heads nodding. I felt the tension dissipate, replaced with a sense of camaraderie. The camaraderie solidified when I recounted a harrowing mission we had faced. I described how a simple error could have cost lives, but we rallied together, trusting each other's instincts. By the time I reached the climax of the story, the room was silent, the weight of shared experiences palpable. When I finished, I didn't expect applause, I craved genuine connection. And in that moment, I felt it, a shift in the atmosphere as 200 Marines stood together, saluting after my last words resounded through the air, declaring, "First TO fight." Hearing those words echo back to me, I realized I had become part of something bigger than myself. As I descended the podium, a deep sense of relief washed over me. The Marine Corps had always represented resilience, and today was no different. I had not just overcome the stranglehold of my father's words but had transformed them into a catalyst for change. This wasn't just about proving myself to him, it was about proving to every person in that room that expectations can indeed be met and then reshaped into something new. I felt their belief, or at least the seeds of it, taking root as they welcomed me into their ranks, and for the first time, I truly saw my reflection, strong, determined, and unyielding. I had found my place. The humid air filled with the scent of diesel and sweat felt like a blanket wrapped around me as I walked towards the assembly area. It was just another day in the life of a first lieutenant, but today felt different. Each Marine stood with their backs straight and eyes fixed ahead, a sea of camouflaged uniforms that echoed discipline, resilience, and a silent understanding of what we were all working toward. I couldn't help but think of my father's words from years ago, "I expected better." Those words had haunted me when I first enlisted, a relentless echo of doubt that trailed me through rigorous training and late nights studying tactics. I could still see his disappointed expression, the way his brow furrowed with concern. Yet here I was, leading Marines, earning their respect through persistence and growth, something I used to think I'd never achieve. As I took my place in front of the troops, I felt the weight of my own expectations blend with theirs. I knew many of them had their own stories of struggle and perseverance. I could recognize the uncertainty in some of their eyes, the way they fought internally to overcome challenges they faced, whether it was in training, personal lives, or the journey that led them to enlist in the first place. I had been there too, grappling with the fear of failure, wondering if I truly belonged among them. But as I stood there, ready to address the Marines under my command, the familiar surge of purpose surged through me. I was no longer the unsure recruit. I had grown, not just in rank, but as a leader capable of fostering camaraderie and strength. "Let's get it straight," I began, my voice cutting through the murmur of the formation. "Each of you has what it takes to push through your limits. I've seen it in your training. I've felt it in my own journey. There's a unique bond that forms in moments of shared struggle, and I could see the realization flicker across the faces in the crowd. They were receptive, hungry for validation that their hard work had not gone unnoticed. I wanted them to understand that growth isn't always about immediate success, it's about the continuous climb from failure to achievement, a journey marked by grit and determination. It was a lesson I'd learned the hard way, and one I was more than willing to share. Just as I was about to continue, my gaze caught sight of a young Marine standing off to the side. She looked like she was processing everything at once, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and fear. I recognized that look because I had worn it myself. She had her own battles ahead, but she needed the encouragement to realize that she could conquer them. "Remember," I said, locking my eyes with hers, "the only way to truly fail is to stop trying." I watched her posture straighten slightly as if a weight had been lifted. If I could ignite that spark within just one Marine today, it would all be worth it. By the end of my address, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had long sought. I may have been an officer, but today, I was a mentor in the truest sense. Watching them salute, the crisp snap of their movements a sign of commitment, brought a swell of pride to my chest. No longer did I hear my father's words shaming me. Instead, I felt gratitude for the fire they kindled within me. The journey had been long and tumultuous, defined by doubts and fears, but each struggle had honed my resolve. Persistence had not only shaped my path but had built the resilience I now needed to equip these Marines with the same weapon of growth. Together, we stood as a testament to the idea that while the past can shape us, it does not define us. The memories of that day come in waves, crashing against the shores of my mind with an intensity that leaves me breathless. I remember the sun blazing, a sharp contrast to the heavy weight of grief resting on my chest. It was the day I had to say goodbye to my brother, my only sibling, and my first hero. He had a smile that could light up the darkest room, and a spirit that burned bright, even in his last moments. The bittersweet music of the funeral played in my ears as I stood rigid, the uniform pressing against my skin, reminding me of my duty, my commitment, even in the face of personal tragedy. As I stood there, surrounded by family and friends, I felt an unbearable sense of isolation. The cacophony of muffled sobs and whispered condolences washed over me, but it was like a distant storm I couldn't connect with. Those moments were supposed to be for healing, but all I could feel was emptiness. I had often raised my hand and pledged to protect, to serve, and to lead, but the reality of loss struck me harder than any combat training. My brother had always been my rock, my grounding force when the world felt chaotic. Without him, I felt unmoored, lost in a sea of uncertainty and grief. I remember my dad's face, etched with sorrow as he recounted tales of their childhood, the mischievous glint in my brother's eyes shining through his memories. "I expected better," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of those words. Those words hung heavily in the air, more profound than any salutation or ceremonial honor I could have received in my uniform. How could I explain to him that the loss had not only shattered our family but also fractured my understanding of my own purpose? I felt the eyes of our family on me, expecting strength from the one with the rank. But inside, I struggled to hold on to the resolve that my brother had once inspired in me. The days that followed felt like a blur. Each morning, I put on my uniform, a symbolic armor against the world. My brothers and sisters in arms rallied around me, offering support in the ways only they knew how, particularly at the base, where camaraderie was molded by shared experiences and unspoken bonds. I threw myself into the daily grind, focusing on missions and drill routines, hoping the physicality of the work would drown out the emotional turmoil roiling just beneath the surface. Each present arms and commanding yell of first TO fight felt a little emptier, a little more hollow, as if I was performing a duty in a world that had lost its meaning. It wasn't until that one quiet evening, sitting on the edge of my bed with the sun setting outside, that the tears finally came. I could no longer hold them back. The loneliness of loss seeped into my bones. I realized that it wasn't the military training or the rank that mattered most in times like these. It was the love and connection we built with those we lost. My brother wouldn't have wanted me to fight this battle alone. He had always believed that strength could be found in vulnerability, and as I let the tears fall, I felt the first flicker of healing begin. Grief is a trial, one I would carry into my future, but I knew I could lean on my Marine family while remembering the bond one had with my brother. In that moment, I began to understand that my duty wasn't just to serve but to honor his memory by living fully, even amid the heartache. I had always believed that recognition was a double-edged sword. It could be a blessing or a curse, depending on how it came. My father's expectations loomed large over me, even after I left home to join the Marines. When he'd said, "I expected better," it was a reminder of the weight of my choices, the scrutiny of my actions. Yet, standing in that hangar, surrounded by my peers, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to embrace: pride. The last few months had been a whirlwind, filled with the reality of leadership, heavy with the responsibility of a rank that had never seemed so daunting. But the moment the 200 Marines stood and saluted, a wave of relief washed over me. The formation was a sight to behold, each one of them a testament to countless hours of sweat and determination. I had led them through exercises that pushed us all to our limits, but the camaraderie that developed was what truly fortified our unity. As I walked to the front for my recognition, my heart quickened. It wasn't just about me, it was about each of us, pushing back against the limits society imposed, battling perceptions that painted women in uniform as either anomalies or unduly aggressive. I could see the pride in their eyes, Marines I had bled and cried with, the very ones who had helped me find my footing in this unforgiving landscape. When they called my name, I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't anticipated. There was the weight of my father's expectations still nudging at my consciousness, but it faded against the backdrop of cheers and shouts of "first to fight" from my fellow Marines. It was an affirmation that resonated deeply within me. These were the voices that mattered the most, the ones that acknowledged my worth not just as a leader but as part of a brotherhood that extended beyond gender. I turned to face them and felt their energy wash over me, an unspoken agreement that we were in this together, always pushing, always striving for better. I remembered the long nights of training, battling through exhaustion and doubt. There had been moments when my own resolve had faltered, when I questioned if I was strong enough to lead, to inspire, to earn that salute. But today was different. Today, as I stood before them, I realized that my journey reflected theirs. They had seen me at my worst, vulnerable and questioning, yet we had emerged together, transformed by the struggles we shared. The tears threatened to spill as I caught sight of familiar faces who understood the sacrifices made for this recognition, the unbreakable bonds forged in the heat of adversity. As I took a moment to absorb it all, I silently vowed to honor this recognition. I wouldn't let my father's words define my worth. I would let the pride of my fellow Marines become my shield, my motivation. I would carry that salute with me as a constant reminder of who I am and where I come from. As I turned back to address them, my voice steady and strong, I felt the weight of my rank settle comfortably on my shoulders. This was who I was, not just a first lieutenant, but a Marine dedicated to leading and uplifting, not just for myself, but for each of them who stood with me that day. I sat in the command tent, the glow from the map table illuminating the faces around me. It was chaotic, the air thick with tension and the smell of sweat and determination. Just days prior, I'd been standing behind the podium, feeling the weight of expectation on my shoulders as I addressed my unit. I had promised them we would reclaim our ground, push back against those who threatened our mission, our people, and our very beliefs. Now, it all hinged on the next few hours. The anticipation boiled in my stomach, a knot of anxiety that I couldn't shake off. I glanced at the clock. The minutes crawled by, each second echoing the words my dad had said to me before I shipped out, "I expected better." Those words had haunted me during my earlier deployments, when I struggled with the responsibilities of leadership and the burdens I carried as a woman in this field. But today, as I prepared to lead my Marines into the fray, I pushed those doubts aside. I fought against the memories, forcing myself to focus on the mission at hand. My determination burned with a fierceness that reminded me why I had chosen this path. For my family, for my comrades, but most importantly, for myself. When I finally stood to brief the team, my heart raced not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through me. I could see their faces, my Marines, ready and willing, but there was an electrifying uncertainty in the room. I could feel it coming from them, and it was so palpable it was almost suffocating. I leaned in closer, locking eyes with each one, letting them know I was with them through thick and thin. "We reclaim our honor today," I began, my voice steady, "not just for ourselves, but for those watching us. We will do what we were trained to do. We fight for each other." The responses came in a chorus of ma'am. But the gravity of what lay ahead hung over us like a storm cloud. The mission was more than just a strategic operation. It was a direct confrontation with our adversaries, a chance to set a benchmark for what we stood for as leaders and warriors. As we moved out, I could feel my stomach churn with anticipation. The objective lay ahead, obscured by the dense foliage and the sounds of distant gunfire. This was it. I had to lead them through this. Failure was not an option. As we pushed deeper, we encountered our first line of resistance. Gunfire erupted around us, and I felt the ground shake beneath the weight of chaos. My instincts kicked in. I shouted commands, urging my Marines to regroup and move with precision. Each decision I made felt monumental. In the fleeting moments, I caught sight of a fellow lieutenant, his face reflecting both fear and resolve. I remembered my training, the lessons drilled into us from day one, embracing the chaos while thinking 10 steps ahead. I fought to keep my composure, for them, because if I faltered even for a moment, everything could unravel. It was in that moment of pressure that I realized this was the pinnacle of leadership, where courage and vulnerability collided. We pushed through, inching closer to our objective, and every second felt like an eternity. Yet, as the familiar roar of gunfire surrounded me, I also felt the fervor of my mission ignite within. I could almost hear my dad's voice echoing, "I expected better." But today, I would give him a reason to be proud. This was my moment to show not just my Marines, but myself, that confidence could coexist with fear, and that I was capable of leading through the chaos. I was a first lieutenant, and I had not just accepted this role, I had embraced it. We weren't just soldiers on a battlefield, we were a family, and I was determined to protect each and every one of them. The moment I stepped onto that weathered stage, the weight of expectation settled on my shoulders like a heavy pack. I could see the audience through the haze of stage lights, friends, family, and the faces of those who had been with me every step of the way. My dad stood in the front row, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, yet his eyes held a mixture of concern and doubt. I caught a glimpse of my mother, her hands clasping tightly in her lap, as if trying to suppress the fear that had hung over our family since I signed up. It was a family affair, yes, but it was also a confrontation with every silent judgment and whispered critique that had shadowed my decision to join the Marine Corps. As I began my speech, outlining the values I held dear and the sacrifices my fellow Marines and I had made, I noticed the reactions from the audience. A few nodded along, their expressions filled with understanding, while others furrowed their brows, wrestling with their emotions. I knew that not everyone in that room believed in the path I had chosen. They saw me as a daughter, a sister, not a soldier. I was aware of the whispered doubts. Was it worth it? Shouldn't she aim for something less dangerous? Yet there, amidst the uncertainty, was a profound sense of belonging. I was standing with my own, among those who chose to serve and protect. But it was my father's reaction that echoed the loudest. I could almost hear his thoughts as he stood tall, chest out, a Marine at heart even if he hadn't donned the uniform. "I expected better," he'd once said during a moment of frustration, his voice trembling with disappointment. And yet, there he was, supporting me unconditionally, even when he struggled to understand. As I spoke about the camaraderie, the sacrifice, and the honor that came with being a Marine, I saw his expression shift. The pride began to intermingle with acceptance, a recognition that I had chosen a path that was far from easy but filled with purpose. When I concluded with our motto, "First to fight," it was a rallying cry not just for my fellow Marines but for my family as well. I could sense the shift in energy. The earlier wariness among some was replaced with applause, a hesitant yet genuine acknowledgement of the life I had dedicated myself to. As I stepped down, a sea of uniforms rose in unison behind me, and the sound of clapping morphed into a chorus of hurrah that resonated through the auditorium. It was a moment suspended in time, where the pride of service and the love of family intertwined, reminding me that despite our differences, we were all standing together. In the days following that event, I felt the heaviness of skepticism from some linger, but moments like that one had a way of pushing through the clouds. My father approached me afterward, his voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability. "You know, I didn't expect to feel this way, but I get it now," he admitted, the initial disappointment beginning to fade like a mist. "I realized that you are not just my daughter, but a warrior." I hugged him tightly, and in that embrace, I felt the barriers fall away. We were more than a family grappling with choices. We were a unit, learning to respect the essence of what each of us stood for, even if it was different from what we had envisioned. As I stood in front of the formation, I could almost hear my father's words ringing in my ears, that harsh, dissatisfied tone, "I expected better." He used to believe that ambition belonged to men, that my dreams of becoming a Marine were just fanciful thoughts for someone like me. But today, as I looked into the faces of the 200 Marines standing before me, I felt a surge of purpose washing over me. The weight of expectation hung like mist in the air, but it was no longer the weight I carried. I had shed it. I had marched through years of self-doubt, and the culmination of it all was here, in their salute, in their unwavering commitment. The journey to this moment wasn't easy. Each step I took felt like a rebellion against the insecurities planted in me, nurtured by society's whispers that I should strive for something softer, less demanding. I fought not only against my own uncertainties but also against the skepticism of those who couldn't see beyond the surface. Today wasn't just a celebration of rank or an acknowledgement of my service, it was a testament to resilience, to every night spent worrying whether I'd ever be enough, to every training session that pushed my limits. I had learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to prove my worth. For every you can't I encountered, I had become a watch me, not just for myself, but for every woman who felt silenced by the weight of expectation. When Colonel Smith called my name, the echo of it reverberated through the sea of uniforms. The pride in my chest swelled as I stepped forward, bearing the insignia of a first lieutenant. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, the rush of victory mingling with humility. This was a victory for every little girl who looked up to the stars and dreamed of being more than what the world had scripted for her. The salute from my Marines wasn't just ceremonial, it was a recognition of battles fought, tears shed, and dreams realized. With every salute, I felt the walls of doubt crumble further, their reverence for who I've become overpowering any lingering whispers from my past. Looking out over the formation, I was struck by the realization that I now stood among equals, no longer overshadowed by the opinions of others. I had fought tooth and nail for this place, and it wasn't just about me, this was for everyone who dared to defy the odds. There's a beautiful kind of strength in knowing that, as a woman in a leadership role, I can inspire those around me to push through their own barriers. I could see it in their eyes, a spark igniting, fueled by our shared commitment to challenge the norms and embrace the call of duty, together. This was about loyalty, about camaraderie, and about the future we were all building together. As I took a deep breath, the chill of morning air coursed through me, bringing with it a sense of clarity. No longer did I feel tethered to the expectations of my past. Instead, I felt grounded in my purpose, standing tall in the face of adversity. The flag fluttered behind me, a bright wave of red, white, and blue, symbolizing not just my allegiance, but the countless sacrifices made by those who came before me. I had reached the pinnacle of a journey that was paved with doubt, and as I looked out one last time over my Marines, I felt like a lighthouse in the fog, steadfast, unwavering, and ready to lead the way into the future. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.